He didn't even look at her when he pushed the divorce papers across the polished oak table. "Sign it, Nora." "Let's stop pretending this marriage means anything," Daniel Reed said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen with growing impatience. He smirked when she didn't reach for it right away. "You were a phase. I've outgrown you." What he didn't know was that Nora Hale had spent years quietly building something he would soon answer to, and the moment her signature touched that paper, he didn't just end a marriage. He signed away the only protection he had left. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, Nora had already made a decision that would change everything. The conference room felt colder than it should have. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the way Daniel sat across from her, relaxed, confident, already finished with something she was still expected to grieve. Nora kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't touch the papers yet. Her name sat at the bottom of the last page, waiting. "Are you going to make this difficult?" Daniel asked, leaning back in his chair. His voice carried that sharp edge she had learned to recognize. Not anger, not quite. Something worse, disdain. Nora lifted her eyes to meet his. "I'm reading," she said quietly. He let out a short laugh. "It's standard. My lawyer made sure of that. There's nothing in there you don't already know." Across the table, the attorney, Mr. Calloway, shifted slightly. His gaze flicked toward Nora, then back to the documents. But something about it lingered longer than necessary. It wasn't indifference, it wasn't even curiosity, it was recognition. Daniel didn't notice. He checked his watch instead. "I have a dinner at 7. Vanessa hates it when I'm late." There it was. Casual, unapologetic. Nora didn't react. Not outwardly. Vanessa Cole, senior associate, polished, ambitious, always just a little too close during company events. Nora had seen the shift months ago. The late nights, the guarded phone calls, the way Daniel started dressing like he had something to prove, or someone to impress. "You'll like her," Daniel added, almost as an afterthought. "She understands my world." Nora's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. "I thought I did too," she said. Daniel's smile thinned. "You understood the version of me that needed you. That version doesn't exist anymore." Silence settled between them. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale, if you have any questions about the terms, I don't," Nora said. She reached for the pen. It was heavier than it looked. Smooth, expensive. The kind of object Daniel valued because it signaled success. Her reflection flickered faintly on its polished surface. "You're walking away clean," Daniel continued. "No alimony disputes, no asset complications. Honestly, it's generous." Nora almost smiled at the word, but she caught herself. "I see," she said instead. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Let's not drag this out. We both know you're not built for the kind of life I'm stepping into. Not built for it." The words landed, but they didn't cut the way they used to. Because Nora knew something Daniel didn't. She had read every line of the prenup years ago. Not just read it, understood it. The clauses buried beneath the surface. The protections tied to disclosures. The triggers that only activated under specific conditions. Conditions Daniel had just met without realizing it. Mr. Calloway's eyes shifted again. This time, there was no mistaking it, he knew. Not everything, but enough. "Mrs. Hale," he said carefully, "you are not obligated to waive. I know what I'm doing," Nora said softly. She signed her name. The pen moved smoothly across the paper, one steady stroke, no hesitation, Nora Hale. She placed the pen down. Daniel exhaled like he had been holding his breath for months. Relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by satisfaction. "Good," he said, gathering the documents. "That's done." Just like that, years reduced to ink. He didn't look at her again as he stacked the papers neatly and slid them toward his side of the table. "You'll have until the end of the week to move out," he added. "The apartment is in my name." Nora stood slowly. "Of course," she said. There was no argument. No pleading. No scene. That, more than anything, seemed to confuse him. "You're taking this, well," Daniel said, narrowing his eyes slightly. "Better than I expected." Nora met his gaze one last time. "I prefer clarity," she replied. For a moment, something flickered across his expression. Uncertainty, maybe. But it vanished just as quickly. He shrugged it off. "Then we're done here." Nora turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Mr. Calloway spoke again, his voice low. "Mrs. Hale." She paused, glancing back. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. But his eyes held a quiet weight. Respect, not sympathy, not pity, something else. Daniel frowned. "What?" Mr. Calloway straightened. "Nothing," he said. "Just procedural." Nora gave a small nod and stepped out into the hallway. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For a moment, she stood there, alone, the noise of the city humming faintly through the glass walls of the building. Then her phone vibrated in her hand. "Unknown number," she answered. "Yes," she said, a pause. Then a voice on the other end, calm and precise. "Ms. Hale, we've been waiting for your confirmation. Has the agreement been executed?" Nora glanced back at the closed door. "It has," she replied. Another pause. "Understood. We'll proceed immediately." Nora ended the call. Inside the conference room, Daniel laughed at something he was saying to his lawyer, already moving on. He didn't see the way Mr. Calloway's expression had changed. Didn't notice the subtle shift in tone. Didn't understand that the moment Nora signed those papers, everything had already begun to move. And for the first time, he was no longer the one in control. Daniel didn't stay in the conference room long after Nora left. He signed the last page with a quick, careless stroke, handed the stack back to Mr. Calloway, and checked his phone again. A message from Vanessa lit up the screen. "Table's booked. Don't be late. I have news you're going to love." He smiled to himself, slipping the phone into his pocket. Whatever Nora had been to him, she wasn't part of this next chapter. That was the point. "Everything finalized?" he asked. Mr. Calloway nodded slowly, organizing the documents with a precision that felt deliberate. "The agreement is executed. There will be a short processing period before all provisions take effect." Daniel waved a hand. "Standard timeline. I've done this before." The lawyer didn't respond to that. Instead, he slid a copy of the signed agreement into a separate folder, one that he kept slightly closer to his side of the table. Daniel didn't notice. He stood, straightened his jacket, and reached for his watch. "Appreciate the efficiency," he said. "I like things clean." "Yes," Mr. Calloway replied. "I can see that." There was something in its tone Daniel didn't quite catch, but it didn't matter. He was already moving toward the door. Outside, the hallway buzzed with quiet corporate energy. Assistants moved quickly between offices. Phones rang softly behind glass doors. It was the kind of environment Daniel thrived in. Controlled, predictable, built on visible power. He walked through it like he belonged there. Because he did. Or at least, he believed he did. By the time he stepped into the elevator, he was already drafting the narrative in his head. The divorce had been necessary, strategic, a clean break from a life that no longer matched his trajectory. Nora had been comfortable, too comfortable. He leaned against the mirrored wall, adjusting his tie as the elevator descended. She had never pushed him, never challenged him, never understood the scale of what he was trying to build. While he stayed late closing deals, she stayed home with her quiet routines, her simple habits, her refusal to evolve. He had outgrown her. That was the truth. The elevator doors opened into the lobby, and Daniel stepped out into the late afternoon light. The city stretched ahead of him, glass towers, constant motion, opportunity in every direction. This was his world. And now, finally, nothing was holding him back. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Vanessa. "Don't forget, Arthur's expecting you tomorrow. Big conversation. Promotion level big." Daniel's grin widened. Arthur Sterling didn't throw that kind of language around lightly. If this went the way he expected, he wouldn't just be another senior executive. He'd be stepping into something far bigger. He didn't even think about Nora as he walked toward the curb and flagged down a car. Not then. Not when everything felt like it was aligning. Across the street, Nora stood still for a moment, longer than necessary, before moving. She didn't watch Daniel leave. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked in the opposite direction, her pace steady, her expression unreadable. The city didn't slow for anyone. It never had. People brushed past her without a second glance, each one wrapped in their own urgency, their own priorities. Nora blended into it easily. That had always been part of the point. Her phone felt heavier in her hand now, not because of its weight, but because of what had just been set in motion. She stepped into a quieter side street before unlocking it again. 3 missed calls, All from the same number. She called back. It rang once. "Miss Hale," the voice answered immediately. Calm, controlled, familiar. "We received confirmation. I expected you would," Nora said. A brief pause. "Do you want to proceed with the acquisitions schedule as outlined, or would you prefer to stagger the entries?" Nora leaned lightly against the brick wall beside her, her gaze unfocused as she looked out at the street. "Has Sterling Ridge responded to the preliminary offers?" she asked. "Not directly, but their board has scheduled an internal review. That usually indicates pressure." Nora nodded slightly. "Then we stay on schedule," she said. "No acceleration, no delays." "Understood." Another pause, longer this time. "There is one more detail," the voice added. "Your former husband remains a senior figure within the company. That introduces variables." Nora's lips pressed together for a fraction of a second. "I'm aware," she said. "Do you want him flagged for removal during transition?" The question hung there. Simple. Efficient. Cold. Nora exhaled slowly. "No," she said. "Keep everything by the book. If there are performance issues, they'll surface on their own." Of course. The call ended. Nora lowered the phone but didn't move right away. 3 years. 3 years of quiet observation. Of learning how Daniel operated inside a system he barely understood. Of watching which doors opened for him and which ones only appeared to. She hadn't needed to interfere. He'd done most of the work himself. That was the part he would never see coming. A black sedan pulled up at the end of the street, not drawing attention, not out of place. It waited without honking, without urgency. Nora pushed herself off the wall and walked toward it. The driver stepped out as she approached, opening the door with a small nod. No words, no unnecessary gestures, respect, but not spectacle. She slid into the back seat, the interior quiet and understated. The kind of space designed for decisions, not appearances. As the car pulled into traffic, Nora finally allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment. Not in relief, not in regret, just in recognition. Something had ended. But something else, something far more significant, had just begun. Back in the conference room, Mr. Calloway remained seated long after Daniel left. He reviewed the signed agreement again, slower this time, his fingers tracing the margins of a clause most people overlooked. Disclosure requirements, asset representations, trigger conditions tied to a mission. He exhaled quietly. Then he reached for his phone and dialed a number from memory. It picked up on the second ring. "Yes," a voice answered. "It's done," Mr. Calloway said. He signed, no amendments, no disclosures added. A pause. "And her?" the voice asked. "She signed as well." Another pause. "Longer. Then we move forward." Mr. Calloway glanced at the empty chair where Nora had been sitting. "He has no idea," he said. "No," the voice replied. "He doesn't." The line went dead. Mr. Calloway set the phone down slowly, his gaze lingering on the signature at the bottom of the page. Nora Hale. For a moment, he considered the scale of what had just been set into motion. Then he closed the folder, because tomorrow morning, the first internal notice from Sterling Ridge's board would go out, and Daniel Reed's name would be on the agenda. Nora didn't go back to the apartment that night. She stood in the quiet of a short-term rental overlooking the river, the kind of place designed for people between lives. Temporary furniture, neutral colors, nothing that held memory. Her suitcase sat unopened by the wall. She moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but precision. Every action felt deliberate, controlled. The phone call from earlier replayed in her mind, not as words, but as timing. Everything had begun exactly when it needed to. She walked to the small dining table and set her bag down. From it, she pulled a thin leather folder. Inside were copies, documents she had requested months ago, long before Daniel ever mentioned divorce. Not because she expected this, because she understood him. Nora flipped through the pages, stopping on one section, the prenup agreement, signed years earlier. At the time, Daniel had skimmed it, joking about lawyers and unnecessary formalities. He hadn't read the clauses that mattered. He hadn't asked why certain disclosures were structured the way they were, why some assets were listed broadly, while others were defined by category instead of value. He had trusted the version of her he thought he understood. That had been his first mistake. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was Mr. Calloway. Nora let it ring once before answering. "Yes. There's something you should be aware of," he said, his voice measured. "The processing team has flagged a compliance review." Nora's fingers stilled on the page. "Expected?" she asked. "Yes, but sooner than anticipated. It appears your former husband's firm is already under internal scrutiny." Nora leaned back in her chair. "Scope? Preliminary. Financial reporting inconsistencies. Nothing formal yet, but the timing is aligned." She understood what he meant. Daniel thought he was stepping into something bigger. In reality, the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. "Do they suspect external pressure?" she asked. "Not directly, but they've scheduled a board review for early next week." Nora closed the folder. "Then we don't interfere," she said. "Not yet." There was a pause on the line. "You're certain?" Mr. Calloway asked. "This could accelerate things in your favor." Nora's gaze drifted to the window. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass. "I'm not interested in acceleration," she said quietly. "I'm interested in accuracy." Another pause. "Understood." The call ended. Nora set the phone down and remained still for a moment. Then she reached for her laptop. Within seconds, the screen lit up with a secure login interface. No branding, no company name. Just a clean, minimal portal that required 2 levels of authentication before it allowed access. She entered her credentials. The dashboard that opened wasn't personal. It wasn't casual. It was operational, rows of data. Structured holdings. Layered entities tied together through controlled channels. Each one mapped carefully to avoid exposure while maintaining leverage. Sterling Ridge appeared in one of the columns. Not prominently, not yet, but enough. Nora clicked into the file. The numbers weren't new to her. She had reviewed them before, studied the company's patterns. The way deals were structured, the risks they overlooked, the assumptions they relied on. Daniel's fingerprints were all over it, not directly, but in decisions, in shortcuts, in confidence that wasn't always backed by depth. She exhaled slowly. He had never been as careful as he believed. A soft knock came at the door. Nora closed the laptop halfway before answering. The driver stood outside, posture straight, expression neutral. "Ms. Hale, your scheduled call in 15 minutes has been moved forward." "By whom?" she asked. "Executive request," he replied. Nora considered that for a moment. "Confirmed?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded once. "I'll take it here." He stepped back without another word. Nora returned to the table and reopened the laptop fully this time. A new notification had already appeared. "Incoming secure line." She accepted it. The screen remained dark, but the voice that came through was unmistakable. "Miss Hale." She didn't respond immediately. "Your timing was precise," the voice continued. "We've been monitoring the situation. The divorce simplifies several variables." Nora leaned back slightly. "That was the intention," she said. A faint sound on the other end. "Approval, maybe." "Sterling Ridge is more vulnerable than we anticipated," the voice said. "Their internal review will expose weaknesses faster than expected. If we move now, we can secure controlling interest before they stabilize." Nora didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved back to the open file on her screen. "Not yet," she said. Silence. "Then you're choosing to wait." "Yes, for what reason?" Nora's expression didn't change. "Because the person they trust most hasn't realized he's already exposed," she said. Another pause. "You're referring to Mr. Reed." "I am." The voice on the other end shifted slightly. Less neutral now. More curious. "And you believe that waiting benefits us?" Nora's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. "I believe that when someone builds their position on assumptions," she said, "removing those assumptions too early teaches them nothing." Silence again, longer this time. Finally, the voice spoke. "Understood." The line disconnected. Nora closed the laptop slowly. Across the city, Daniel Reed was still celebrating a future he thought he had secured. Still believing the next step was his. Still trusting that the system he moved through would continue to reward him. He had no idea that the reviews scheduled for next week would include his name. No idea that the structure protecting him had already been altered. No idea that the person he had dismissed as unnecessary had just declined the fastest path to taking everything from him. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. Nora stood and walked back to the window. The river moved steadily below, reflecting the lights of a city that never paused long enough to notice what was shifting beneath it. She didn't smile. She didn't hesitate. She simply watched. And somewhere across town, inside Sterling Ridge, an internal memo was being drafted. A routine notice. A scheduled review. One line buried near the bottom. Senior leadership performance evaluation to be included, and Daniel Reed's name was the first on the list. Daniel walked into Sterling Ridge the next morning, like nothing had changed. If anything, he carried himself differently. Lighter, sharper. Like shedding Nora had stripped away something unnecessary. He adjusted his cufflinks as he crossed the lobby, catching his reflection in the polished marble. He looked exactly how success was supposed to look. That mattered. The receptionist greeted him with the same polite nod, but something in her tone felt slightly delayed. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." "Morning," he replied without slowing down. He didn't notice the way her eyes lingered for a second longer than usual as he passed. The elevator ride-up felt routine, familiar, his domain. By the time he stepped onto the executive floor, his phone buzzed again. Vanessa. "Don't forget lunch. Arthur wants to see you before that." Daniel smiled. Of course he did. He walked straight toward his office, but halfway there, his assistant intercepted him. "Daniel." Arthur moved the meeting up. "Conference room B," he said. It wouldn't wait. Daniel paused. That wasn't typical. Arthur Sterling was many things, but impulsive wasn't one of them. Still, he nodded. Got it. He turned toward the conference rooms, adjusting his jacket again as he walked. Whatever this was, it had to be good. Promotion level big. That's what Vanessa had said. He pushed the door open. Arthur was already inside, standing near the window. Two other executives sat at the table, both from departments Daniel didn't usually interact with. Compliance. Finance. Daniel slowed slightly, but only for a moment. "Arthur," he said, stepping in. "You wanted to see me?" Arthur turned, his expression neutral. Not warm, not cold. "Close the door," he said. Daniel did. He took a seat without being asked. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning back slightly. Vanessa said this was about the next step. Arthur didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced at the two men seated at the table. "This is just a preliminary discussion," Arthur said. "Nothing formal. But we need clarity on a few things." Daniel frowned slightly. Clarity about what? One of the men, mid-50s, thin-framed, precise, slid a folder across the table. "Your recent deal structures," he said. Daniel didn't touch it. "My deals are solid," he replied. "You've signed off on every one of them." Arthur's jaw tightened slightly. "Just take a look," he said. Daniel opened the folder. At first glance, it looked routine. Transaction summaries, client names, dates. Then he saw the markings. Highlighted sections, notes in the margins, questions. He flipped a page, another, and another. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Internal review," the compliance officer said. "We're identifying inconsistencies in reporting." Daniel let out a short laugh. "Inconsistencies? That's a stretch." "Is it?" the man asked calmly. Daniel leaned forward now, flipping to a specific page. "This deal alone brought in over $3 million in revenue." "You're questioning that?" "We're questioning how it was categorized," the man replied, "and how certain expenses were justified." Daniel's expression hardened. "You're digging through paperwork to find technicalities," he said. "That's not how this works." Arthur finally stepped closer to the table. "That's exactly how this works when the board asks questions," he said. Daniel looked up sharply. "The board?" Arthur didn't answer directly. "They've scheduled a review," he said instead. "Early next week." Daniel blinked once. "That's standard," he said quickly. "Quarterly oversight. Nothing new." Arthur held his gaze. "This isn't quarterly." The room felt smaller all of a sudden. Daniel sat back slowly, the folder still open in front of him. "What exactly are you saying?" he asked. The second executive, finance, spoke this time. "We're saying your portfolio is under evaluation. All of it." Daniel's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "Based on what?" "Patterns," the man replied. "Risk exposure. Decision trails." Daniel shook his head. "This is ridiculous. You don't flag someone at my level without cause." Arthur's voice dropped. "We didn't." Daniel stilled. "The board did. It's heavy. Uncomfortable." Daniel forced a small laugh, but it didn't land. "And since when does the board take interest in individual portfolios?" he asked. Arthur didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was measured. "Since someone started buying into the company quietly," he said. Daniel's brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with me?" Arthur studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide something. "Probably nothing," he said finally. But when new stakeholders come in, they tend to look closely at existing structures. Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. Then let them look, he said. They'll find results. Arthur nodded once. I hope so. The meeting ended shortly after that. No resolution, no clear accusation, just pressure. Daniel walked out of the room with the folder still in his hand, his mind moving faster now. Something wasn't right. This wasn't how things were supposed to unfold. He had expected momentum. Instead, he had friction. As he turned the corner, he saw Vanessa waiting near his office, leaning casually against the wall. There you are, she said, smiling. I was starting to think they kidnapped you. Daniel forced a smile back. Just a discussion, he said. Nothing major. She pushed off the wall and walked toward him. Well, I have something that is major, she said, lowering her voice slightly. Arthur confirmed it. They're restructuring leadership. Daniel's attention sharpened instantly. Restructuring how? Vanessa glanced around before speaking. They're bringing in outside oversight. Someone with capital. Big capital. Daniel frowned. That doesn't make sense. Sterling Ridge doesn't need outside control. Vanessa smirked slightly. Every company needs money, Daniel. The question is who's writing the checks. Daniel didn't answer. Something about the way she said it unsettled him. Not because of the words, because of the certainty behind them. Do you know who it is? He asked. Vanessa shook her head. No name yet, just whispers. But whoever it is, she paused, her smile tightening. They're already making people nervous. Daniel looked past her, back toward the conference room he had just left. For the first time since signing those papers, a thought crept in that didn't fit his narrative. Not doubt. Not yet. But something close. Because somewhere between the quiet tone of Arthur's voice and the way those documents had been marked, it felt like decisions were already being made. Without him. Without his input. Without his control. Later that afternoon, an internal email landed in his inbox. Subject line, Board Review, Mandatory Attendance. He opened it. His name was listed first, and at the bottom, in smaller text, one line stood out. Final approval authority to be confirmed prior to session. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. Then he leaned back slowly in his chair. Because for the first time, the question wasn't what the board wanted. It was who they were waiting for. By midweek, the tension inside Sterling Ridge had shifted from subtle to visible. Daniel felt it the moment he stepped off the elevator. Conversations stopped a fraction too quickly when he walked by. Assistants lowered their voices. Even the usual morning chatter in the executive wing had thinned into something quieter, tighter, controlled. He ignored it. Or at least, he told himself he did. He walked straight into his office, closed the door, and dropped the folder from yesterday onto his desk. It landed with a dull thud. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then he opened it again. The same markings, the same questions. But now, they felt different, more pointed, more intentional. His phone buzzed. Vanessa, we need to talk, not here. Daniel exhaled sharply and grabbed his jacket. They met in a private lounge 2 blocks away, the kind of place executives used when they didn't want to be overheard. Vanessa was already there, seated in the corner, her posture composed but her expression sharper than usual. You're late, she said. Had things to deal with, Daniel replied, sliding into the seat across from her. What's going on? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. They're digging deeper than you think, she said. Daniel frowned. You're talking about the review? I'm talking about everything, she said. Finance, compliance, board oversight. It's not routine. Daniel shook his head. You're overreacting. They always tighten things before restructuring. It's optics. Vanessa held his gaze. No, she said quietly. It's not optics. Something in her tone made him pause. What do you know? He asked. She hesitated. That alone was unusual. Vanessa never hesitated. There's a new entity buying in, she said finally. Not directly, layered through multiple funds. Quiet. Precise. Daniel leaned back slightly. So? That happens all the time. Not like this, she replied. This isn't passive investment. This is strategic positioning, he studied her. You sound impressed. I sound cautious, she corrected. Because whoever it is, they're not just buying shares. They're reshaping influence. Daniel crossed his arms. Still doesn't explain why my deals are under a microscope. Vanessa's expression shifted, just for a second. Then she said, Because your deals are easy to question. The words landed harder than expected. Daniel's jaw tightened. Excuse me? I'm being honest, she said. You move fast, you close aggressively. That works when no one's looking too closely. And now they are? He asked. Yes. Silence settled between them. Daniel leaned forward. You were fine with that pace before, he said. You encouraged it. Vanessa didn't deny it. That was before the stakes changed, she said. He stared at her for the first time. Something didn't align. Not just in the company. In her. What aren't you telling me? He asked. Vanessa looked away briefly, then back at him. My father's firm is exposed, she said indirectly, through one of the holding structures tied to Sterling Ridge. Daniel blinked. That's not my problem. It becomes your problem if your name is attached to the transactions they start unraveling, she replied. He sat back slowly. That's not going to happen. Vanessa didn't respond, and that silence said more than anything else. Back at the office, Daniel moved faster. Emails, calls, internal systems. He pulled up his deal history, scanning through transactions he hadn't questioned before. Numbers that had always made sense in context now felt less stable. Not wrong, but vulnerable. His assistant knocked lightly on the door. Daniel? Finance is asking for additional documentation on the Apex portfolio. He froze for half a second. Apex, he repeated. Yes, she said, they flagged it this morning. Daniel forced his expression to remain neutral. I'll handle it, he said. She nodded and left. The door closed. Daniel turned back to his screen slowly. Apex Solutions. The name sat there, familiar. Vanessa had introduced it months ago. A workaround. A way to move certain costs without triggering internal friction. Clean. Efficient. He had trusted her because she understood the system, because she moved in the same direction he did, because she had felt like the future. Now, staring at the numbers, something didn't sit right. He opened the file. The structure looked clean on the surface, but the deeper he went, the less clarity he found. Layers that didn't fully connect, accounts that referenced entities he didn't recognize. His pulse picked up slightly. He grabbed his phone. Vanessa, he said when she answered. We need to talk about Apex. There was a pause on the other end. Then, not over the phone. Daniel's grip tightened. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be, she replied. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. For the first time since the divorce, something real pushed through his confidence. Not doubt. Not yet, but pressure. Because the system he thought he controlled was starting to show him gaps he hadn't seen before. Across the city, Nora sat in a quiet office that didn't carry her name on the door. She didn't need it to. A man across from her, older, composed, accustomed to authority, slid a document across the table. Preliminary findings, he said. Internal audit triggered faster than expected. Nora glanced down at the pages. Apex Solutions was listed near the top. She didn't react. Scope? She asked. Still early, he said. But the pattern is clear. There are discrepancies tied to executive approvals. Nora closed the file. And the board? She asked. They're preparing for intervention, she nodded once. Good. The man studied her. You're not concerned about timing. Nora met his gaze. No, she said. Timing is exactly where it needs to be. She stood. The meeting was over. As she walked toward the door, her phone vibrated once. A secure message. She opened it. A single line. Apex flagged. Escalation likely within 48 hours. Nora slipped the phone back into her pocket without breaking stride. Because somewhere inside Sterling Ridge, Daniel was just beginning to realize something was wrong, but he still didn't know the truth. He didn't know who had set the pace, who had built the structure, who had chosen not to stop it. And as Nora stepped out into the hallway, she made one quiet decision. She wasn't going to interfere. Not yet. Because the deeper Daniel looked into Apex, the closer he would get to something he was never supposed to see. And this time, there would be no one left to protect him. The gala was exactly the kind of event Daniel thrived in. High ceilings, crystal lighting, quiet power wrapped in polished conversation. The kind of room where deals didn't need to be announced because everyone already knew who mattered. He adjusted his jacket as he stepped into the ballroom, Vanessa's hand resting lightly on his arm. Relax, she murmured, her lips brushing near his ear. Tonight is about presence. Daniel nodded. Present, he's understood. Across the room, executives, investors, and board members moved in controlled clusters. Every handshake carried weight, every glance measured. He spotted Arthur near the bar, already deep in conversation with two unfamiliar men. "Let's make an impression," Vanessa said, guiding him forward. As they approached, Arthur looked up. For a split second, something unreadable crossed his face. Then it was gone. "Daniel," he said, forcing a smile. "Glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it." Daniel replied smoothly. Vanessa greeted the others, her tone warm but calculated. "Arthur was just telling us about the new stakeholders," she said, eyes flicking briefly toward Daniel. The two men exchanged a glance before one of them spoke. "Interesting timing for expansion," he said. Daniel stepped in easily. "Growth is always about timing." The man smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't match it. "Is it?" he said. Before Daniel could respond, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it moved like a ripple. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Something at the entrance had drawn attention. Daniel followed the line of sight. A woman stepped into the room. At first, nothing about her screamed for attention. No dramatic entrance, no announcement. Just a quiet, controlled presence. But the reaction around her was immediate. Executives straightened. A board member near the entrance moved forward before she even reached him. Daniel frowned slightly. "Who is that?" he asked under his breath. Vanessa didn't answer right away. She was staring, not with curiosity, with calculation. The woman moved through the room without rushing. People greeted her, not casually but carefully, respectfully. Conversations shifted to include her. Doors opened without being asked. Daniel felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Recognition. Not of her, of the reaction. That was power. Real power. He asked Vanessa. Vanessa shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "but I want to." Arthur stepped forward then, leaving his conversation mid-sentence. That alone was enough to make Daniel's attention sharpen. Arthur didn't do that, not for anyone. "Miss Hale," Arthur said, his voice measured but unmistakably respectful. "I'm glad you could make it." Daniel froze. For a fraction of a second, his brain didn't process the name. Then it did. Hale. Nora Hale, his ex-wife. No, that didn't make sense. He looked again. The woman standing there wasn't the person he had sat across from days ago. Same face, same features. But everything else had shifted, the way she held herself, the way the room adjusted around her, the way Arthur was addressing her. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around his arm. "That's," she started, then stopped. Daniel took a step forward without realizing it. Nora's gaze moved through the room, calm, observing. It passed over him once, didn't stop. Then, a second later, it returned, and this time it held. Not with emotion, not with anger, just recognition, controlled, measured, as if he were a detail, not the center. Arthur gestured toward the group. "Daniel," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You've met Nora before." Daniel forced a laugh. "Yeah," he said. "We were married." The words sounded wrong in the room, smaller than they should have. Nora didn't react. She extended her hand slightly, not toward him, but toward the others. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was steady, unhurried. The two men Daniel had been speaking with earlier stepped forward immediately. "Miss Hale," one of them said, "we've been looking forward to meeting you." Daniel's eyes flicked between them. "Looking forward to meeting her? What is this?" he asked, the edge creeping into his voice despite himself. No one answered him directly. Arthur cleared his throat. "Nora has recently taken a position as a principal stakeholder in several strategic holdings," he said. Daniel blinked. "Stakeholder," he repeated. Nora's gaze shifted back to him. "Yes," she said simply. Vanessa spoke before he could. "How recent?" she asked. Nora turned slightly toward her. "Recent enough to matter," she replied. There was no hostility in her tone. But there was no warmth either. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's impressive," she said. "You've been very quiet about it." Nora didn't answer that. Instead, she glanced toward Arthur. "I'd like to review the final structure before the board meeting," she said. Arthur nodded immediately. "Of course." Daniel felt the ground tilt slightly beneath him. "Board meeting. Final structure." He stepped forward again. "Wait," he said. "What structure?" Nora looked at him then. Really looked. For the first time since she walked in. "You'll be informed," she said. Simple, dismissive, controlled. Daniel's jaw tightened. I think I should already be informed, he said. I'm part of senior leadership. A brief silence followed. Then one of the executives spoke. That's under review, he said. The words hit harder than anything else. Under review. Nora didn't add to it. She didn't need to, because in that moment the room had already made something clear. Daniel wasn't at the center anymore. He wasn't even part of the decision. He was being evaluated. Vanessa stepped closer to him, her voice low. We need to be careful, she whispered. But Daniel barely heard her. His eyes stayed locked on Nora, on the woman he had dismissed. The woman who now stood in a room that moved around her. The woman he still didn't understand. Nora turned slightly, already moving toward another conversation, another group of people who greeted her with the same quiet respect. She didn't look back. And as Daniel stood there, the realization began to settle. Not fully formed, not yet understood, but impossible to ignore. Something had shifted, not just in the company, in the balance. And as the night continued, one final detail reached him. A quiet comment, overheard between two board members near the bar. She's not just a stakeholder, one of them said under his breath. She's leading the acquisition. Daniel's chest tightened, because if that was true, then the board meeting next week wasn't just a review. It was a takeover, and Nora Hale was at the center of it. Daniel didn't remember leaving the gala. One moment, he was standing in that room, watching Nora move through conversations like she belonged there. The next, he was outside, the cool night air hitting him harder than expected. Vanessa followed a few seconds later. You need to calm down, she said, her tone low but firm. Daniel turned toward her. Calm down, he repeated. Did you just see what happened in there? Yes, she said. And that's exactly why you need to think, not react. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps along the curb. That was Nora, he said. Nora. My ex-wife. Standing there like she owns the place. Vanessa didn't answer immediately, because they both knew that wasn't just a figure of speech. Daniel stopped pacing and looked at her. You knew something, he said, earlier. When you mentioned new capital, you had a feeling. Vanessa exhaled slowly. I had a theory, she said. I didn't expect it to be her. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh. It can't be her, he said. She doesn't have that kind of money. She never did. Vanessa's eyes sharpened slightly. Are you sure? She asked. The question hit harder than it should have. Daniel frowned. I lived with her for 3 years, he said. I know exactly what she had. Vanessa tilted her head. No, she said quietly. You know what she showed you. Silence. Daniel didn't respond, because for the first time that distinction mattered. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. This doesn't make sense, he said. If she had that kind of leverage, why stay quiet? Why play? He gestured vaguely. That role. Vanessa didn't answer right away. People don't hide power without a reason, she said finally. Daniel scoffed. Well, whatever her reason was, she's not hiding anymore. Vanessa looked back toward the building. No, she said. She's not. The next morning, Sterling Ridge felt different. Not tense, not quiet. Structured. Like something had shifted into place overnight. Daniel noticed it immediately. Emails were already waiting for him when he logged in. Not casual updates, not routine requests, directives, requests for clarification on deals, notifications of expanded audit scope. A revised agenda for the board meeting. He opened the document. His name was still first. But now there was a second line beneath it. Review subject to external stakeholder oversight. Daniel stared at the screen. External stakeholder. He knew exactly who that meant. His jaw tightened. Before he could process further, his office door opened without a knock. Arthur stepped in. We need to talk, he said. Daniel leaned back slowly. I figured, he replied. Arthur closed the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Arthur walked over and placed a thin file on the desk. You're going to be asked about Apex, he said. Daniel didn't touch the file. I already figured that out. Arthur nodded. Then you should also know that the inquiry didn't originate internally. Daniel's eyes lifted. What does that mean? It means someone outside the company flagged it, Arthur said. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Who? Arthur held his gaze. I don't have a name, he said. But I have a direction. Daniel leaned forward slightly. And? Arthur hesitated. That alone was enough to make Daniel's pulse pick up. It's connected to the same entity that's been acquiring shares, Arthur said. Daniel's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "You're telling me I'm telling you that nothing happening right now is random," Arthur cut in. Silence, heavy. Daniel finally looked down at the file in front of him. Slowly, he opened it. The contents were familiar, too familiar: transaction breakdowns, approval chains, expense routing, and there, buried in the middle, Apex Solutions. Highlighted, flagged, connected. Daniel swallowed. "I didn't build this structure," Arthur didn't respond. "I followed recommendations," Daniel continued. "It was efficient. It worked." Arthur finally spoke. "That's not going to matter in that room," he said. Daniel looked up. "Then what does?" he asked. Arthur's expression didn't change. "Proof," he said, "or leverage." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "And if I don't have either?" Arthur didn't answer, because they both knew what that meant. By noon, the office had shifted again. Word had spread, not officially, not in statements or emails, but in the way people moved, in the way they looked at him. Daniel felt it in every conversation that ended too quickly, in every glance that lingered just a little too long. He wasn't the rising star anymore. He was a question, a risk. Vanessa found him in his office just after lunch. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm aware." "No," she said, "you're not." She closed the door behind her and stepped closer. "My father's firm is being audited too," she said, linked exposure. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible." "It is," she said. "And if they connect it back through Apex." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel stood slowly. "You told me that structure was safe," he said. Vanessa held his gaze. "It was," she said. Until someone started pulling threads. Silence. Then Daniel said it. "Her." Vanessa didn't deny it. "She has access now," she said. "Danfluence, visibility." "No," he said. "This is too precise, too targeted." Vanessa's expression hardened. "Exactly," she said. The realization settled in slowly, not as a single thought, but as a pattern. The timing, the audit, the acquisition, the gala, Nora. Everything aligned. Too cleanly, too deliberately. Daniel turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time, he didn't look like he was in control. "You think she planned this?" he asked. Vanessa's voice was quiet. "I think she didn't stop it. That was worse, much worse, because it meant Nora hadn't needed to attack. She had just let things unfold." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then I need to talk to her," he said. Vanessa stiffened. "That's a mistake." "I don't have a choice," he replied. "If she's behind this, she's not just behind it," Vanessa said. "She's above it." Daniel turned back toward her. "And that means what?" Vanessa hesitated. Then she said, "It means she doesn't need to answer to you." The words hung there, heavy, unavoidable. Daniel grabbed his phone anyway. Because whether Nora answered or not, he was about to find out just how much power she really had. He scrolled through his contacts. Stopped on her name. Haven't deleted it yet? Of course he hadn't. His thumb over the call button, then pressed. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it clicked. But the voice that answered wasn't Nora's. "Miss Hale's office," a calm voice said. "How may I direct your call?" Daniel froze. Because Nora didn't have an office. Not one like that. Not one with someone answering on her behalf. He swallowed. "I need to speak to Nora," he said. There was a brief pause. Then the voice replied, measured and polite. "May I ask who's calling?" Daniel hesitated. Just for a second. Then he said, "Daniel Reed." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Please hold." The line went silent. And for the first time since everything began to unravel, Daniel realized he wasn't calling his ex-wife. He was asking for access. The line didn't stay silent for long. "Mr. Reed." The voice returned, just as calm, just as controlled. "Miss Hale is unavailable at the moment. Would you like to leave a message?" Daniel stood frozen by his desk, the phone pressed tightly against his ear. "Unavailable." He swallowed. "No," he said quickly. "I need to speak with her directly. It's urgent." A brief pause. "I understand," the voice replied. "I'll make a note of your request." "That's not enough," Daniel said, his voice sharpening. "Tell her it's about Sterling Ridge." "About the board meeting." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Please hold." The line went quiet again. Daniel's pulse picked up. Across the office, Vanessa watched him carefully, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He couldn't, because something had already shifted in his mind. The way the assistant spoke, the way she said Miss Hale. Not Nora, not casually, formally, professionally. like someone used to filtering access. The line clicked again. This time, it was her, Daniel. Her voice was exactly the same, and yet it wasn't, because now there was distance in it. Controlled distance. He exhaled almost too quickly. "Nora," he said, "we need to talk." A brief silence. "About what?" she asked. Straightforward. No emotion. Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. "You know exactly what," he said. "Sterling Ridge, the audit, the acquisition. You're involved." Another pause. "Then I am." No denial, no hesitation, just confirmation. Daniel blinked. "You could told me," he said, the words coming out sharper than he intended. "About what?" she asked again. "This," he said. "Everything. You being this." He struggled to define it, because he still didn't understand the full scope. On the other end, Nora didn't rush to fill the silence. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "You didn't ask," she said. The words landed clean. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," she said quietly. "It's accurate." Silence stretched between them. Vanessa shifted slightly across the room, watching. Daniel turned away from her, lowering his voice. "You're behind the audit," he said. "Apex, the board review, all of it." "No," Nora replied. "I didn't create the structure you're being questioned about." Daniel flinched. "That's not what I meant." "I know." Another pause. Then, Daniel said it. "Are you trying to take me down?" This time, the silence was different, heavier. When Nora spoke again, her tone hadn't changed. "I'm not targeting you," she said. "I'm evaluating a company." "That's not the same thing," he shot back. "It is," she said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps across the office. "You knew I was there," he said. "You knew my position, my work." "Yes," she said. "And you didn't say anything?" "No." The simplicity of it hit harder than any argument. "Why?" he asked. For the first time, her answer wasn't immediate, because the truth wasn't simple. But when she spoke, it was still clear. "Because your position was built on decisions you made," she said. "Not on what I did." Daniel stopped pacing. "That's not an answer." "It is," she replied. "You just don't like it." Silence again. He looked down at the file still open on his desk. Apex, highlighted. Questioned. Exposed. "You could stop this," he said finally. "You have that kind of influence now, don't you?" There was no denial, no hesitation. "That's not how this works," Nora said. Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course it is. Everything works that way at your level." "Not this," she said. "Why not?" He pushed. Another pause. "Then quieter," she said, "because if I stop it, it doesn't change what's there." The words settled slowly, uncomfortably. Daniel's grip tightened again. "You're just going to let it happen?" he asked. "I'm going to let it be examined," she said. "That's the same thing," he snapped. "No," she replied. "It isn't." Silence stretched. Longer this time. Then Daniel said more quietly, "You're not even angry. It wasn't an accusation, it was confusion, because if the roles were reversed, he would have been." Nora's answer came without hesitation. "Anger doesn't change outcomes," she said. That was it. No explanation, no emotion, just truth. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. "Then what do you want?" he asked. This time, the pause was longer, measured. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Accuracy," she said, "and accountability." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "That sounds like a corporate answer." "It is," she said. He let out a slow breath. "Right." Another silence. Then Nora added, almost as an afterthought, "You should prepare for the board meeting." Daniel opened his eyes. "I already am." "No," she said. "You're reacting. That's different." The distinction stung. Before he could respond, she continued. "They're going to ask you about Apex in detail, not just approvals. Intent. Oversight. Awareness." Daniel's chest tightened. "You think I can't handle that?" "I think you should understand it," she said. There was no insult in her tone, which made it worse. Because it wasn't dismissal, it was assessment. Daniel swallowed. "You're going to be there," he said. "Yes." Not a question, a fact. He nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see it. "Then we'll talk there," he said. Another pause. "Then we will," Nora replied. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. The room felt quieter than before. Vanessa stepped closer. "Well?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the file again, at the numbers, at the gaps he hadn't questioned before, at the decisions that had felt efficient, but now felt exposed. "She's not stopping it," he said finally. Vanessa's expression tightened. "I didn't think she would." Daniel nodded slowly. Then something else clicked, a detail, small but sharp. She knew, he said. Vanessa frowned. Knew what? Daniel looked up. She knew exactly what they were going to ask, he said. Before the meeting even happens. Vanessa didn't respond, because they both understood what that meant. Daniel turned back to his desk, reaching for the file again. Because if Nora already knew the questions, then she wasn't just attending the board meeting. She was shaping it, and for the first time, Daniel realized something that made his chest tighten even more than before. He wasn't preparing for a review. He was walking into a room where the outcome might already be decided, and Nora Hale would be sitting at the center of it. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at his desk long after Vanessa left, the office lights dimmed to a cold, artificial glow. The file in front of him hadn't changed, but the way he saw it had. Every number felt sharper now. Every approval he had signed too quickly, every shortcut he had justified as efficient, now looked like something else. Something that could be questioned. Something that could be used. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Nora's voice replaying in his head. You're reacting. That's different. It irritated him. But it also unsettled him. Because she was right. The next morning came too fast. The boardroom at Sterling Ridge was already half full when Daniel walked in. Executives sat in small clusters, their voices low, controlled. Conversations stopped the moment he entered. That didn't happen before. He felt it immediately, the shift. Not hostility. Not yet. But distance. Measured distance. Vanessa followed a step behind him, her usual confidence quieter than before. She took her seat without a word, her gaze scanning the room as if trying to calculate something she couldn't fully see. Daniel remained standing for a second longer than necessary. Then he sat. At the far end of the table, his usual place. But today, it didn't feel like his. The door opened again. The CEO walked in first, followed by two board members Daniel barely interacted with directly. And then Nora. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked in like she belonged there, because she did. The room reacted instantly. Not dramatically, not loudly, but noticeably. People straightened. A few stood. Even the CEO shifted slightly as she approached. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen her in that space before, at the gala. But this was different. This wasn't social. This was power. Nora took her seat at the center of the table. Not beside the CEO. Not behind him. At the center. And no one questioned it. Daniel's fingers curled slightly against the table. Because in that moment something became undeniable. She wasn't just involved. She was above them. The meeting began without small talk. The CEO spoke first, outlining the purpose of the review. Corporate structure, recent acquisitions, internal oversight, all the language Daniel knew, all the language he had used. But today, it felt directed at him. Then the documents were distributed, printed, marked, highlighted. Daniel flipped through the pages and froze, because he recognized every section, apex, line by line. Every decision he had signed off on was there. Every inconsistency circled. Every approval questioned. His throat went dry. This is a standard internal review, the CEO said. We're ensuring alignment with governance expectations. Standard. Daniel almost laughed. It wasn't standard. Not like this. Not this detailed. Not this precise. He looked up. His eyes landed on Nora. She wasn't looking at him. She was reading the same document. Calm, focused, unmoved. As if this wasn't personal, as if it was just another evaluation. The first question came quickly, direct, focused. Mr. Reed, one of the board members, said, "Can you walk us through the decision-making process behind Apex Holdings?" Daniel straightened slightly. He had prepared for this. He opened his mouth. And for a moment, nothing came out. Because the answer he had used before suddenly felt incomplete. We identified Apex as a high-growth opportunity, he began, forcing his voice steady. The acquisition timeline required expedited approvals, but all decisions were made within acceptable parameters. Acceptable to whom? The board member interrupted. Daniel paused. To executive leadership, he said. Which includes you. Yes, another pause. And what independent oversight was applied? Daniel hesitated. Because there had been oversight, technically, but not in the way they were asking. Internal review teams were involved, he said. Names? Daniel blinked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Because the names existed, but they hadn't challenged him. They hadn't slowed him down. They had trusted his direction, and now that trust looked like weakness. Across the table, Nora finally looked up. Not at him, at the board member, then back to the document. She didn't speak, but the silence around her carried weight. The questioning continued. Each answer Daniel gave felt thinner than the last. Each clarification exposed another layer he hadn't examined closely enough. Vanessa shifted beside him, her usual confidence gone. She wasn't interrupting. She wasn't helping. Because this wasn't her conversation. This was his. And he was losing control of it. Then came the question that landed harder than the rest. Were you aware of the financial discrepancies identified in the secondary review? Daniel's chest tightened. No, he said. The answer came quickly, too quickly. The board member didn't react immediately. Instead, he glanced down at the document, then back up. Because the documentation suggests otherwise. Daniel's fingers tightened against the table. That's not accurate. Then explain the approval timestamps. The page was turned. A section highlighted. Dates, signatures, his signature. Daniel stared at it, and for the first time he didn't have an immediate explanation, because he remembered signing it, but not reviewing it, not in detail, not carefully, because he hadn't needed to, because no one had questioned him before. A quiet voice broke the tension. May I, Nora? The room shifted again. The CEO nodded immediately. Of course. Nora closed the document in front of her, then opened it again, flipping to the exact page without hesitation. She didn't look at Daniel. She didn't need to. The discrepancy isn't in the approval itself, she said calmly. It's in the lack of secondary verification before execution. Her voice was steady, clear, professional. This creates a gap between authorization and accountability, she continued, which is where the risk emerges. Daniel felt the words hit harder than any accusation. Because she wasn't attacking him, she was explaining the flaw, and in doing so, she was exposing it completely. The board members nodded slightly. The CEO leaned forward. So, the issue isn't intent, he said. No, Nora replied. It's oversight. The distinction mattered. But not enough, because the result was the same. Daniel swallowed. For the first time since the meeting began, he realized something he couldn't ignore anymore. This wasn't just a review. It was a dismantling. Careful, precise, and controlled, and Nora was guiding it. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but completely. The meeting continued, but Daniel barely registered the rest, because his focus had narrowed to her. To the way the room listened when she spoke. To the way decisions shifted subtly in her direction. To the way his authority had quietly disappeared. By the time the meeting adjourned, nothing had been finalized. No decisions announced. No consequences declared. But the outcome felt inevitable. As people stood and began to leave, Daniel remained seated for a second longer. Then he looked up. Nora was still there, gathering her documents, calm, unhurried, like she wasn't walking away from a confrontation, but from a process already set in motion. He stood, took a step toward her. Nora. She paused, then looked at him. Not cold, not warm, just clear. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. I didn't do anything, she replied. I explained what was already there. That's not the same thing. It is, she said. Silence settled between them. Then Daniel said, Lower now. What happens next? Nora held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave him the only answer that mattered. That depends on what they find when they look deeper. She turned to leave, then stopped, just for a second. Without looking back, she added, You should prepare for that. And then she walked out. Daniel stood there, unmoving. Because for the first time, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't about one deal, or one mistake. It was about everything that came after, everything that hadn't been examined, everything that was about to be. And as the boardroom emptied around him, one realization settled in with quiet certainty. The next phase wouldn't be about questions. It would be about consequences, and he had no idea how far those consequences would reach. The final report didn't come with drama, no raised voices, no public humiliation, just a quiet formal conclusion delivered across a long table where every word had been measured twice before it was spoken. Daniel sat through it without interrupting. The findings were clear. Not catastrophic, not criminal, but enough. Enough to strip him of authority. Enough to end the version of himself he had built too quickly. He was reassigned, not fired, not destroyed. but move down, away from executive decisions, into a role where oversight wasn't optional anymore. It was a second chance, though no one called it that. Vanessa didn't stay long enough to see it through. She left before the restructuring was finalized, her ambitions moving on faster than her loyalty ever had. Daniel didn't chase her. For once, he didn't chase anything. Weeks later, the building felt different to him. Smaller, quieter. Or maybe he just saw it more clearly now. He worked longer hours than before, but not to prove anything. Just to understand what he had missed. What he had ignored. What he had assumed would always hold. Across the same floors, Nora moved in an entirely different rhythm. She no longer needed to hide her presence. Meetings adjusted around her schedule. Decisions paused for her input. Not out of fear, but because it made sense. Because she understood the structure in a way most people never bothered to. Her role wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. People listened anyway, the distance between them remained. Not forced, not dramatic, just settled. When they saw each other, it was brief, professional, controlled, no anger left to spill, no need to revisit what had already been decided. One afternoon, months after everything had shifted, Daniel found her alone in a smaller conference room. No audience, no board. Just her reviewing documents on a tablet, the same quiet focus she had always carried. He hesitated at the door, then knocked lightly. She looked up. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Nora studied him for a moment, then nodded once. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a second, neither of them spoke. Not because there was too much to say, but because there wasn't. "I wanted to say," Daniel began, then stopped. He exhaled slowly. "I was wrong," he said instead. The words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded unfamiliar. "I didn't just underestimate you," he continued. "I misunderstood everything. About you. About what mattered." Nora didn't interrupt. She let him finish. "I thought I built something on my own," he said. "I thought I outgrew you because I was moving forward. But I wasn't. I was just moving fast." His voice tightened slightly, and I didn't see what was actually holding things together. Silence followed, not heavy, just honest. Nora set her tablet down. "You didn't want to see it," she said calmly. Daniel nodded. "I didn't." Another pause. "I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. "I know that's not where this goes." He wasn't looking at her now. He didn't expect anything. That, more than anything else, felt different. Nora watched him for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "I meant what I said before," she said. "This wasn't about one mistake." Daniel nodded again. "I know. It was about how you saw me," she continued, "and how easily you replaced what you didn't understand." He didn't argue, 'cause there was nothing to argue. "I did care about you," Nora added, softer now. That part wasn't false. Daniel looked up. Something in his expression shifted. Not hope, just recognition. "But caring isn't enough if it only exists when it's convenient," she said. The words landed without force. But they stayed. Daniel swallowed. "I understand," and this time it didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like acceptance. Nora leaned back slightly, not creating distance, just setting it. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "That part passed." Daniel nodded, slower now. "But I'm also not going back," she finished. The clarity in her voice left no space for interpretation. And for the first time, Daniel didn't try to push against it. He nodded once. "That's fair." It was the simplest thing he had said since he walked in, and the most honest. He turned toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you didn't need to prove anything. Not to me." Nora didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. "I know," she replied. And she did. That was the difference. Daniel left without saying anything else. The door closed gently behind him. Nora sat there for a moment longer, then returned to her work. Not because she was avoiding something, but because there was nothing left to resolve. Outside, the company moved forward. Deals continued, structures evolved, and Nora remained exactly where she had always been. At the center of it. Not hidden anymore, not underestimated, but also not defined by any of it. Her worth didn't need confirmation. It didn't need recognition. It simply existed, and this time it was hers alone. If you had been in Nora's place, would you have walked away, or given him another chance? Let me know what you think.